Anyway, it's been great fun writing plays, I must say.
Welcome to The River Has No Fear of Memories, a series of conversations with Girish Karnad. This podcast is brought to you by the Bangalore International Centre. My name is Arshia and I'm here with Anmol. We recorded these conversations with Girish right before his death in June 2019. In these episodes, we have a chance to listen to Girish's wide-ranging observations about his life and his work. Along with excerpts from his plays, we'll hear various people talk about his legacy as an artist and as a public intellectual.
Look at that. At the very tail end, you can't see the outline. You know what's happening? At the end of the branch, it is a bat. It's a fruit bat which is sucking from a mango fruit. If it flies, you will see the mango. There, it's gone. You see that?
We sound like children, hanging on to every word of his.
Yeah, it's almost embarrassing. But those few hours every evening in the first week of June 2019 were special. You can hear the birds coming home, you can hear Bangalore traffic, and you can also hear that unmistakable voice. Girish would meet us on his terrace with an oxygen tube in his nose and an oximeter on his finger, and we would spend a couple of hours with him talking. When the session ended, he would always offer us a drink.
I feel so lucky to have been there. In this introductory episode, I hope we can share what it felt like to be on that terrace with Girish and give our listeners a sense of the kinds of conversations we had and what finally made it into this podcast series. We'll also talk a little about the aspects of Girish's life that we don't cover. But for now, let's get into how all of this started.
Now Arshia has pursued and got me to give this, which I had avoided giving for what, 2-3 years?
For 2 years, I'd been asking him, when can we have these conversations? And he would grunt and, ignore the question. And then one day, out of the blue, in March 2019, he calls me and he says, when are we doing these interviews? And I say, May 1st? And he's like, no, June 1st. So there we were on June 1st. I was so pleased. I was so excited to do these conversations with him because in all the years that I've known him, every time I met him, I would learn something new. I mean, his knowledge of classical Sanskrit literature, his amazing memory, the way he would tell a story. Even if he'd heard that story from somebody else, he would tell it like he'd been there.
And of course, we wanted to know what made him such a good playwright. He had written a memoir in Kannada about his early years, but we wanted some sort of a record in his own words about the latter half of his life.
Yeah, he was reluctant to talk about the later years.
In my head, I connected that hesitation with what he had told me about Kurosawa's autobiography.
But Kurosawa's autobiography stops with the first film. Last line is, he says, I was wondering where the next whatever Japanese dish over my rice will be available. When my wife opened the paper and she read, Japanese film wins the international award at Venice. And it was a film that had not even been given for the competition. It had been sent for publicity, and the local Japanese person, just for fun of it, had put it in and it had won then. And then he says, after that, there was no more worry about what to go on rice.
Girish had told me this story on more than one occasion about the ending of Kurosawa's something like an autobiography. He would say it was right that Kurosawa ended his memoir with his first film, because everybody knows what happens once you're famous. Once one has succeeded, what follows is history. And maybe that's why his memoir also just covers his early years.
For someone who was reluctant to have these conversations, once we started, Girish was fully there. I mean, every day we would come with our questions, but Girish had his own ideas. He would come prepared to talk about the things that he wanted to say. And of course, we had no choice but to go with that.
We had imagined that we would have a lot of time to talk with him, but with his death, we were left with these unfinished conversations. In this series, you will hear Girish talk, and then Arshia, myself, and other guests will situate his comments in a larger context.
Certain themes kept cropping up in these conversations. When we were listening to the recordings after, it became clear that we needed to anchor the episodes around Girish's interests. Kannada literature, Indian theatre, existentialism, being a public intellectual, the art and craft of playwriting.
These conversations are far from being a complete picture of his life. For this introductory episode, we're including a couple of stories from the parts of Girish's life that we don't get into. For example, his involvement in films.
I was never interested in films. I hated films. In my childhood, I loved Nadia and John Cover's films, the stunt films of them. But Hindi films I detested thoroughly. Songs and dances and so. Then at Oxford, one saw Fellini, Antonioni. But one was in theatre. I mean, these people didn't really attract me. Then, of course, one came across Sattar. Now, one was impressed by Sattar. Then I said, good. Very nice. What hit me was samskar. When I read the book, somehow I said, this is it. And as Ramanujan always says, translation is a way of possessing the work. You haven't done it, you're jealous, so you translate it. With samskara, I was smitten. I thought, why haven't I written this book? Who is this stupid D.R. Ananthamurthy who has written? And I've told Ananthamurthy also this. Why should you have written it at all? All this fell in together. Satyajit, small budget films, things that were happening then. And I felt I must make a film. I must get into a film on samskar. Kind of insolence, I suppose, or overconfidence, or being caught by it. Because I wrote my first play without wanting to be a playwright. I became an actor without trying to be an actor. I became a film actor without wanting. I told Patravi, please let me be your assistant. I want to be Satyajit, I don't want to be. And he said, look, what to do. And that's when Basu Chatterjee saw me. And saw me. That's a pun. Because he literally saw me in that film, Samskara. And he offered me the first role in commercial cinema, which was in Swami. But because of Samskara and the reputation it got, art cinema, and so on, I was asked to be the director of the Film Institute. But I was not really a filmmaker, I think. So I find too many, I can talk about my plays. I can't talk about my films in the same detail. Too many things wrong, I think.
There's a lot going on in what Girish just said. He seems to have had a difficult relationship with films.
Of course, what interests me is what he says about translation. What Ramanujan says, that translation is possession. Because Girish hadn't written Samskara, he wanted to make sure that he would be involved in its film version.
That's fascinating, that even his foray into films was in some ways tied to his writing life and his writerly ambitions. In our episode on playwriting, Girish talks about how everything he did was in the service of becoming a better playwright.
But besides film, the other thing you will not find here is a discussion of the cultural institutions that Girish was a part of. And this is despite the fact that he had an impact on the cultural policies of this country for 2 decades.
One reason that justifies my writing memoir. I was nominated the chairman of the Sangeet Natak Academy. At the very first meeting, a man in saffron, scraggly beard, came up to me and said, "I'm Appukuttan Nair," who's a great Kathakali scholar. I had known of his name. And he said, if you don't do anything, Kudiyattam is dying. Now, Kudiyattam I knew, of course, one knew, heard of her. So I said, why is he dying? And they said, the last guru, he will die. He's in his 80s. And if Sangeet Natak Academy doesn't support it, there are no students, no one is interested, no one knows anything about it. So I said, okay. He said, why don't you go to the ministry? So I said, Mr. Nair, I know what going to the ministry means. Nothing will happen. In those days, Kudiyattam was an unknown form. I had heard of it because I had been to Kerala, and studying these forms before writing Ayavadana. And with this performing arts, once the guru dies, that's the end. You can't revive it. You can't revive it by looking at books. It has to be taught face to face, body to body. So I formed a committee. We worked out that it cost about 5 lakhs. And then I signed a document that we were giving it 5 lakhs. And the academy exploded. They said, but you don't have financial powers. 5 lakhs. 5 lakhs, you have to go to the finance committee. You go to the ministry. In those days, this was 1988 actually. So I said, no, what to do? I have signed the agreement. So he said, I'm sorry, we will have to suspend you. And I was 50 and I'd just been nominated. So suspending me was not quite easy. I knew that. So I said, what should we do? And then he said, you really played a very canny game. What we'll do is ratify it. So, and in the government, anything can be done. And this is the experience I had in the government all through. In London, with the Sangeet Natak Academy and that if you put your neck on the block and do it, you can get through with it. People are continually trying to avoid responsibility. We did that and we gave it 5 lakhs and it flourished. And now Kudiyattam is acknowledged as the World Heritage Site, whatever it is, and for all that, at the risk of sounding immodest, I must take, along with Appukuttan Nair, sole credit. If I hadn't done it at that time, I hadn't taken the art form would have died.
2 things stand out to me. One is that Girish knew his performance traditions. He had done research in Kerala and other parts of India for Hayavadana, and that's why he knew Kudiyattam. But what made him so effective as the head of a cultural institution was that he was an artist. He was a theatre practitioner.
Well, immodest or not, this is not the only time that Girish used his great talent and his significant stature in support of a public cultural institution. Just listen to this next anecdote.
Aru came and said she wanted to build a theatre here. 2 or 3 meetings which I attended to her, I said, please don't call me. You're asking me to waste my time. Okay, don't call me. I'm not coming. And so on. And when the theatre was being built, it was too sharp. I thought it was all wrong. Then Murla Siddhappa came to me saying, there's a card here inviting me to the opening of Rangashankaram. I said, oh my God, in my name. And then I asked her, how could you publish it in my name? And she said, no one seemed to be helping me. And you were not warm, but I had to ask someone. So I said, okay, I'll come. So that evening, the chief minister was invited, the theatre opened, we went on stage and the same thing. I said, my God, she's built a theatre. I've been grouching all my life. Here is a theatre full of 300 people. So I told her, I'm sorry, I eat humble pie. I'll write a play for you. And I'll write a play that no one else can do.
Of course, the play is a heap of broken images. Here is an excerpt from the beginning of the play where the Kannada writer Manjula addresses a TV audience after the success of her English novel. Mallika Prasad reads the part of Manjula.
Namaskara. I'm Manjula Nayak. I must mention that officially I am Mrs. Manjula Murthy. But my creative self continues to be Manjula Nayak. There are some areas in which we must not let marriage intrude too much. Talking about one's work is a very difficult task. So let me find an easy way out. Let me just take up two questions I constantly come across. They seem to bother everyone, here, abroad. I'll answer them to the best of my ability within the short time at my disposal and shut up. Actually, that's what a writer should do, shouldn't she? Write and shut up. The first question. You have probably guessed it already. After writing in Kannada all your life, why did you choose suddenly to write in English? Do you see yourself as a Kannada writer or an English writer? What audience do you write for? And variations on that theme. Actually, let me confess. If I had foreseen how many people I would upset by writing in English, I would not have committed that folly. Intellectuals whom I respected, writers who were gurus to me, friends who I thought would pat me on the back and share my delight, they were all suddenly breathing fire. How dare you write in English and betray Kannada? Betray. The answer is simple. If there was betrayal, it was not a matter of conscious choice. I wrote the novel in English because it burst out in English. It surprised even me. I couldn't understand why it was all coming out in English. But it did. That's all. There is no other explanation. What baffles me, actually, let me confess, what hurts me is why our intellectuals can't grasp this simple fact. I've been accused of writing for foreign readers. Accused. As though I had committed a crime. A writer seeks audiences where she or he can find them.
A Heap of Broken Images. That title is from Eliot's Wasteland. Eliot was one of Girish's great heroes, and Girish even did a sketch of him. You know that sketching was Girish's secret hobby. Anyway, Broken Images was written in both English and in Kannada in 2004, when there was an active debate about whether English was an Indian language or not. And that's exactly what the play is about. Is an Indian writer authentic if they're writing in English? Girish was very sure that he was a Kannada writer. And we have a delightful conversation in this series between Vivek Shanbhag and Girish about Kannada literature and what it means to be a Kannada writer.
And in that episode, Vivek and Girish also talk about the challenges in writing a contemporary play. When we spoke with Vivek later, he reminded us that Girish's first play set in a contemporary milieu was Anju Mallige, which was published in Kannada in 1977. In fact, most of our conversations with Girish revolved around playwriting and Indian theatre, and that's the focus of this series: what he wrote, why he wrote it, and how he wrote it. And the thing that I was most moved by, during our interviews was how he kept coming back to Anju Malige. How, even in the last week of his life, he was looking at ways to improve a play that he had written, 50 years ago?
Yeah. We would talk about Anju Malige almost every evening. Girish would ask us, like, where do you think the problem is? What should I cut? Do you think I should publish it? But in the course of those conversations, it was Girish himself who put his finger on the flaw in the play. But of course, it was too late for him to fix it.
It was very strongly influenced by streetcar. They're straight from Oxford. Actually, it's a record of a... And when they say that racist is overdone, it's not. That's how the racist behaved. And I got... What my sad part this is that I never met him. Had I met him, I would have got a more human angle to it, probably. People carrying bicycle chains and hitting the Asians, that is all that was happening. It should work. They all say it doesn't work. It should work, but I don't know. Because what happens is the heroine dies and there is a scene in which afterwards they all sit and discuss it. But the point is when you do the play, audience just leaves because our heroine is dead. What is there to, perhaps I should just cut it out and not reveal that she commits suicide until through them, when they talk.
But Girish would often do this, He would spend decades writing and rewriting his plays, Bali, The Fire and the Rain. And in the episode on playwriting, Girish talks about how a writer needs to know their audience. That's what Girish learned from the failure of Bali, that his audience was in India and not somewhere else.
Yes, we talk about that in the playwriting episode. But I want to come back to Anju Malige and how Girish says that it's a record of the times, the 1960s in the UK. He was there at Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. This is also when Girish was attracted to the European philosophy of existentialism, which would fundamentally shape his life and his work. And it was in Tughlaq, which he wrote shortly after he returned from England, that Girish found his perfect existentialist hero, the mad monarch.
I was at Oxford. I went to India, what used to be called, I think, India House. I took out an elementary book of history, started with Mohenjo-daro, and started reading. Where is a good subject? Came to Mohenjo-daro, Ashoka was a cliche, Shahjahan, all this sort of, went through it, until I came to Tughlaq. And I said, mad Tughlaq. God, marvelous, because of existentialism and so on, madness was in the air. So, and I was about 23, 24, mad. So I wrote this play about the mad Sultan. And then even what made it even madder was that he had actually banned public prayer in his kingdom for 5 years. And I thought, how marvelous, And I wrote about him. But then as I started reading deeper and deeper, it occurred to me that if you were an atheist, as I wanted him to be, you wouldn't ban public prayer. It would mean nothing to you. It's only a man who was a theist, who loved God, who would worry so much about prayer, to whom prayer would matter. He somewhere wanted to challenge God. Do what you like, I won't pray for you. And why?
See, that's brilliant. He's nailed the problem of existentialism as the problem with God. We discussed this at greater length in our episode on existentialism. And there, Girish leads us to bhakti through his play Flowers. What do you do when God acts? The priest in Flowers is shattered when he experiences the proof that God does exist.
But it was Tughlaq with its existentialism and its modernity that electrified Indian theatre, and it propelled Girish onto the national stage. What's impressive, though, is how Girish followed that up with an even more audacious play, Hayvadana, where he took on another set of big philosophical ideas and also experimented with form.
Did you say audacious? You know what audacious is? Padmini is audacious, the female character in Hayavadana, because she intentionally, by accident, mixes up the heads of her lover and her husband in order to create the perfect man. I mean, the goddess herself is shocked and she says, "My dear daughter, there should be a limit even to honesty."
Padmini is quite something.
But you know, Hayavadana was extraordinary. People had never seen anything like it. Girish had combined folklore elements, a story from Sanskrit Kathasarit Sagara, European philosophy, the question of where does the self reside, in the mind or in the body. And he was able to bundle all of this up into a beautiful and utterly compelling human drama, which was brilliantly directed in totally different ways by B.V. Karant and Satyadev Dubey.
With Karant knew his theatre. Karant was a theatre man. So all the time, like with Hayavadana, when Hayavadana, I had just read the transposed heads. And I said to Karant one day when we were talking, there is this transposed head story. We must make a film, I said. Nice film. And Karant said, Filma? Yake filmo? Chi, film film medare. Natka madona. Natka bariri now. In his usual fashion. Natka bariri. So I said, my God, you're right. It's really material. I said, yes, you're right. It's good material for a play. And Karan said, yes, not only will you write, I know you'll write within the next 15 days. And I wrote. Satyadev did it in Hindi. And Satyadev was taken by the fact, by one line in the play, where the horse says, I have become a horse, but I haven't got the language. And Satyadev was a Hindi wala. He would have been ideal on the front page. We are a country we never get out of a problem. We come back to it again. And this is exactly what was happening then. These idiots, RSS, are doing exactly what Congress did then. 3-language formula. People are sending their children to an English medium school. Who wants Hindi now? Can you give them jobs? There is unemployment in UP. This is... in fact, whatever success they have, slowly will fall apart on this, because resentment will begin. Anyway, I don't want to go into that. But what I mean is this. Satyadev loved it. So Satyadev did it in Hindi and Karant did it in Delhi. And for the first time, we had used folklore, horses, masks, all this sort of thing. And this was hailed as the Natya Shastra re-enters. People were all waiting how to use traditional forms.
Hayavadana, Habib Tanvir's Charandas Chor, Vijay Tendulkar's Ghashiram Kotwal, Shanta Gandhi's Jasma Udan, all of these brought a new sensibility to our metropolitan stages. Indian theatre was so exciting in the 60s and 70s, and Girish was such an integral part of that we devote an entire episode to it. And there, Girish talks about the beginnings of modern Indian theatre. He talks about the intense relationships that his generation of theatre makers shared with each other. He talks about the knockdown debates they had. For instance, Girish has something really interesting to say about Vijay Tendulkar, no?
Yes, but coming back to Girish, after Hayvadana, he really didn't write anything that he was happy with. This was a time when he was struggling with Bali and Anju Malige. In 1987, when he was a Fulbright scholar at the University of Chicago, he returned to folk tales and wrote the exquisite Naga-Mandala. And you were there. Tell us about that.
Oh, Naga-Mandala. What is there to say? It's my most favorite play in the whole world. Even ahead of Oedipus Rex, which I truly love. And here's just one of the reasons why Naga-Mandala is truly great. Girish displays this astonishing level of self-awareness in the play. The prologue is about a playwright who hasn't written a good play in so long that he's been cursed. To paraphrase the goddess from Hayavadana, all I want to say is, my dear Girish, there should be a limit even to honesty.
Let's listen to the prologue from Naga-Mandala, published in English in 1990. Vivek Madan reads the part of the playwright.
I may be dead within the next few hours. I'm not talking of acting dead, actually dead. I might die right in front of your eyes. A mendicant told me, you must keep awake at least one whole night this month. If you can do that, you'll live. If not, you will die on the last night of the month. I laughed out loud when I heard him. I thought nothing would be easier than spending one night awake. I was wrong. Perhaps death makes one sleepy. Every night this month, I have been dozing off before even being aware of it. I am convinced I am seeing something with these eyes of mine, only to wake up and find I was dreaming. Tonight is my last chance. For tonight is the last night of the month. And of my life, perhaps? For how do I know that sleep won't creep in on me again as it has every night so far? I may doze off right in front of you, and that will be the end of me. I asked the mendicant. I asked him what I had done to deserve this fate, and he said, you have written plays. You have staged them. You have caused so many good people who came trusting you to fall asleep twisted in miserable chairs that all that abused mass of sleep has turned against you and become the curse of death. I hadn't realized my plays had had that much impact. Anyway, tonight may be my last night. So I have fled from home and come to this temple, nameless, empty. For years, I have been lording it over my family as a writer. I couldn't bring myself to die a writer's death in front of them. I swear by this absent God, if I survive this night, I shall have nothing more to do with themes, plots, or stories. I abjure all storytelling, all play acting.
A.K. Ramanujan, the poet, translator, scholar, he was the one who had invited Girish to the University of Chicago as a Fulbright scholar, and it was Ramanujan who gave Girish the two folk tales that form the heart of Naga-Mandala. Girish dedicates Naga-Mandala to Raman, and the dedication reads, A.K. Ramanujan, friend, hero, guru. Girish had known Ramanujan when he was a college student in Dharwad, and Ramanujan was a young professor in Belgaum. And Girish often referred to Raman as his Akshaya Patra, the gift that never stops giving.
To me, he was. Simply because I had come to literature blank. I had no notions of what literature should be. I learned it all from him. On railway platforms, on restaurants, anywhere. And he was one of those teachers who spoke happily. The Raman I just absorbed. He said so much. He was a continual information because he had thought it all out. At that time I hadn't thought it all.
Ramanujan inspired Girish in so many ways.
What Ramanujan very often said to me, Girish, if you want to write first-rate writing, your rivals are not within the circle of Karnataka or India. You have to think of the world. Take them as your rivals. Just take that as your horizon and write for the best.
And we know that Girish produced incredible works. That's how most of us actually know him, through his plays. In this episode, you've been listening to excerpts from two of his plays, and you will get to hear more such excerpts in every episode of this series.
Naga-Mandala unleashed a fertile period in Girish's writing, because soon after that, in 1990, he wrote Taledanda, which is significant because it's his most overtly political play. And he wrote it in response to the Mandir Mandal agitations that were rocking the country. And this is also the time during which Girish himself became more politically vocal. He spoke up in public against what he believed was wrong. And from that point until he died, Girish was our conscience keeper, at least for those of us who believe in a fair and just India.
Arshia, you had asked him what prompted him to become this sort of a public intellectual.
That really happened much later. In fact, it happened in the early, because when the Hubli Dargah issue started, and my friends started getting attacked, and they had no defense. You see, my attack on Naipaul was, you speak on BBC and you attack the Muslims have no defense. No one speaks for them. So I took that up with the Dargah. This is in 92, I think. And I lost all my friends.
Did you see this coming in your lifetime?
Not so. Not what came in the last 4 years. Before that, yes, it was there. But this sort of deliberate manipulation, that Modi and Shah have been able to do. I didn't think Indians would be so gullible.
There's an entire episode dedicated to his growing engagement in public and political life, both as an artist and as an activist.
We hope that in this series, we've provided a portrait of Girish Karnad, writer, thinker, and a man who stood up for what he believed in. You will meet him as a playwright, as a Kannada writer, as a maker of Indian theatre, as a philosopher, as a humanist, and in all of these ways, as someone we shall miss dreadfully.
Girish wore so many hats, but if you asked him who he was, he would always unequivocally say, "I'm a playwright."
I'm very clear, but let me be clear. See, I'm 80, so I can afford to be clear because I've been phenomenally successful in my life. Not many playwrights of my generation have had the success that I've had. I've been produced by the best directors of my generation, acted by the best, actors. I've had good translation, so there's nothing I can grump about. So, given that, that's how one can talk. Anyway, it's been great fun writing plays, I must say.
You have been listening to The River Has No Fear of Memories, a series of conversations with Girish Karnad. We thank the Nilekhani Philanthropies for supporting this series, Pallavi MD and Konarak Reddy for the original music, Gokul Abhishek, Gaurav Krishna, and the Bangalore studio for sound recording and engineering. At the Bangalore International Centre, our thanks to Lekha Naidu, Raghu Tenkaila, Saraswati MP, S. Sarvanna Raj, Rajashekhar B.N., Manas Sampath, and of course, V. Ravichandran. Ajay Krishnan, Sunil Shanbag, Vinod Ravindran, and Vivek Madan, thank you for being there when we needed you. Thank you also, Vivek Shanbhag and Shanta Gokhale. Our special thanks to the Karnad family. Anmol, Tikoo, and myself, Arshia Sattar, have put these episodes together from conversations that we had with Girish Karnad in June 2019.